This lecture is on the Facilitators Toolkit. So the idea here is that we've been talking about a whole suite of different communication skills, planning strategies, tactics that you can use in communication. And I want to talk a little bit about just how they come together as a toolkit that you can use when facilitating decision making as a manager. So one thing, a general thing to keep in mind is that when you are working as a facilitator, whether you're truly neutral or whether you have a dog in the fight, is that you're participating as an active member of the conversation. Even though you're not necessarily determining the outcome, you may not be giving suggestions, may not be participating in a vote. You're very much an active role in moving that conversation along. So your job as the facilitator is to do a number of things. Your job is, of course, to help people to stay on agenda and to stay on topic. Your job as the facilitator is to help people to understand each other. And this can mean a lot of different things. This can mean helping people to know each other's needs and interests. This can mean just listening carefully for the way people phrase things. Oftentimes, if you listen closely in a meeting, you'll find that people who think they agree, or at least are acting like they agree, are saying subtly different things. And sometimes your job as a facilitator is to call out those sort of uncomfortable moments. People may even kind of be consciously aware of the fact that they disagree, but it can often be rude to ask people to state their preference or position in the level of detail required to really resolve those kinds of disagreements. So it's your job as a facilitator to push people a little bit, to get them to the point that they need to be at in terms of saying what they believe and why they believe it and what their needs and interests are, even when that level of detail or investment makes them uncomfortable. And this is with an eye, of course, towards maximizing joint gain. So you're not doing this just to make people uncomfortable, but when there's transparency and clarity at the table, people will be happier with the decisions. And then, of course, your job is also to just help protect people from bad habits. So one of the bad habits I see frequently in meetings, both as a participant and as a facilitator, is that people seem to reach agreement on something. They kind of look around, okay, we all agree, we're settled, let's move on. And then two things can happen. One, as I mentioned before, is that they're not really in an agreement. So it's your job to call that out. And another is that even if they are in agreement, nobody writes it down. So it's your job as the facilitator to call that out and say, okay, it sounds like we all agree. Here's the specific idea I think we're agreeing on. What steps do you need to take now with this decision? So that's your job as a facilitator. Okay, excuse me. So some things to consider when designing whatever process it is that you'll be using for your meeting or decision. One thing you want to consider is your neutrality as a facilitator. There's no such thing as true neutral. Even when I'm mediating people I've never met before, I'm not really neutral. I'm listening to them and thinking, oh, maybe this person's kind of a jerk, or that person's making really good arguments, or yeah, but they signed a contract, right? I'm listening, I'm human, I'm making evaluations, but I'm not letting that come out in my practice. So you're never going to be truly neutral, but you can perform neutral, and you can do that even when you're not even close to neutral. So, for example, I used to train the staff of a customer service center, and you better believe I used all of the elements of this communication toolkit in training them to talk to customers. Because what is customer service if not conflict resolution 90% of the time? And we, as the customer service department who are selling a product, we are definitely not neutral. We do not want to give them a refund, but we speak neutrally in the sense that we are still doing our best to make them feel heard. We're still trying to reframe what they're saying. We're still trying to pick out the feelings and the values and the interests and the needs, right? We're performing all this neutrality because we want to help them feel heard and we want them to understand us. And then, of course, we're still sharing our positions, but we're using that speaking with structured communication that I covered in the last lecture to try to express our positions in as neutral a way as possible. So we're not saying, oh, you screwed up, you need to do this. We might say, you know, consistency with policy is important to our company, right? So we're speaking in terms of values and interests. So we're maintaining as much neutrality as possible. Related thing that's very, very important to consider whether you're truly neutral or not is the extent to which you give advice or suggestions. Certainly, as when for our customer service people on the phone, they're going to give suggestions. They're going to suggest maybe you could exchange for this product, or maybe you could try a different strategy, or maybe we can't give you a refund, but we can give you a credit. Of course, we're giving suggestions, but we're being very, very careful about it. And as a general rule in life, I shy away from giving advice or suggestions unless I absolutely have to. Obviously, as a professor, it's my job to give some advice or suggestions, but I do so in a self-determinate way. I say, now take this information and match it with your values and interests to come up with a strategy that works for your particular circumstance. And when I'm mediating, as a very strict rule, I never ever give any advice or suggestions. And the reason I never give advice or suggestions as a mediator is a couple reasons. First and foremost, it can be quite arrogant. These are people who have been living their situations for years or decades. I've been listening for 2 hours. It's so arrogant of me to think that after 2 hours, I know what's going to solve their problem. So that's reason number one. The other reason is liability. If I give a suggestion and it doesn't work out that well, I don't want that on my conscience, right? So that is part of those two reasons are why my self-determination principle or my tendency to stay away from advice or suggestions carries over into nearly everything I do in life. One, because I don't think I magically have the solutions to other people's problems. And even if I did, I don't want them to blame me if it doesn't work out well. So those are some things to consider. A third thing to consider is time cost. It takes a lot of time to engage in this thorough, full decision making process. Remember, we talked about heuristics. I'll talk later about satisficing, which is settling for good enough instead of optimizing. We have reasons for doing these, but when it's important to you to optimize, you may want to engage in the more thorough facilitation process. That means finding the integrative solutions, really exploring the space. Okay, so that's a lot of ramp up about why we think like facilitators and some general principles. I want to now point to some of the tools that we have covered in this course that you can use. One tool that you can use is neutral reflections. That's something that you'll use anytime you want to build understanding in a conversation. Another tool you'll use is open-ended questions. Again, something that you'll use when you want to build understanding in a conversation. You will use integrative framing when you want to try to either get an item on a topic on the agenda for further discussion, or when you want to prompt brainstorming or consider a solution. So integrative framing is that tactic I mentioned earlier, where you take a value or interest from both sides of the table and put them together. So to go back to the example that we talked about with royalty rates, it would say, it sounds like you need a solution that recognizes the increased popularity over time, and you need a solution that is consistent with your policy of decreasing royalty rates. So you're using that framing to present people both their needs and interests to highlight the fact that they're potentially compatible and look for those collaborative solutions. And you can also turn that around in a question. You can say, what are some strategies that would get you the policy consistency that you're looking for, and you the recognition of increased popularity, right? So you can pair these interests together to ask questions. Other strategies you can use are issue pairing. Now, this is something that, of course, you'll use as a negotiator as well. But issue pairing is looking for those opportunities to dovetail interest, to find those integrative solutions across interests. So in our previous example of the radio station and the engineering firm, you're never going to find an integrative solution if you talk only about advertising or only about tech support hours. But if you put the two issues side by side and ask, is there some way that we can consider these issues simultaneously to get you both the affordability and support that you're looking for? Integrative solutions often become quite apparent when you put the issue pairs side by side. And of course, that requires having some understanding already about people's interests and priorities. And then finally, one skill that you can use that I don't believe I've discussed so far is called process mapping. Um, I will demo that in the video for next week. But process mapping is basically what you do as a facilitator to keep people on agenda. It often happens that people go off topic, and it's your job to just gently bring people back. So if I'm in an early phase of discovery, where our goal is to build understanding and uncover needs and interests, and someone gets really excited about brainstorming solutions, I might just gently do a feeling reflection and a value reflection and then bring them back on topic. So I'll say, it sounds like you're feeling really excited and you're eager to find solutions that are sustainable for everybody. And at this stage of the process, we're still just in building understanding. Later on, we're going to brainstorm. So I'll ask you to bring that idea back up later. So now I'm going to ask a question to get them back on topic. And that's called process mapping. So these are some things that you can do as a facilitator, as a third party in a conversation to help to build understanding, to help seek those integrative solutions and generally move things along smoothly. And that concludes the lecture on the Facilitators Toolkit.